Hey, we got our first guest. Excellent. Excellent. I'm new to this whole IG live situation, so hopefully hopefully I won't be too much of a Luddite. Yeah. Yeah, a little bit early, you know. Never hurts to do a sound check, get all the technical issues out of the way. Maybe it's a generational thing. I don't know. Yeah, no, and it's been funny too with all these the IG live battles, like the versus battles. Seeing all these musicians and recording artists and whatnot try to figure out you know how to have parties online. And so it's a learning curve. It's a learning curve for all of us. Hey, Zuki's here. Zuki in the house. Oh man, hello everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I hope everyone's doing all right. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I hope everybody's doing all right. Everybody's safe and social distancing. Hopefully, uh, you know, doing what they can to flatten the curve, so to speak. I even shaved a little bit for this too. Like I don't know if you can tell, but yes. The ubiquitous bookshelf background. It's a necessity. It's an absolute necessity. I don't know if I'd be able to call myself a writer if I didn't have a bookshelf background. And this isn't even just this is just a piece. There's like all of that, and then there are at least two other bookshelves. It's part of the brand. It's part of the brand. The bookshelves. So yeah. So, yeah, hopefully our wonderful moderator will be joining us soon, so that you Blank alone is yes. I got all dressed up. Yeah, exactly, exactly. Um, Yeah, what did I shave? Oh, trust me, Zuki, it looked a lot bigger than this. Yeah, it's my superpower is I'm able to grow facial hair very, very, very fast, prodigiously fast. So, it's not necessarily the most useful superpower, but you make it work. You make it work. No, these eyebrows are all natural. All natural. I barely even touch them. Eyebrows are all natural. Shout out to Lives of Great Men. I get asked that question quite a bit actually, so I take it as a compliment to my eyebrows. And so hopefully our moderator joins us soon so that you don't. Maza, it's true. It's true. It's absolutely true about the eyebrows. Um, oh man, facial routine. Uh, oh, y'all are too kind about these eyebrows. Oh my goodness. It's all I don't know. I guess maybe it's the genes. I guess y'all should thank mom. Um, it's good eyebrows. um, yeah, no. So facial routine. It's all generally I exfoliate in the shower and then out of the shower. I do a little bit of shaving, or sometimes if I've given myself a big haircut beforehand. I groom. I sometimes use some sort of like tiny clippers to groom, but oftentimes just a razor works. It's very low maintenance, and then moisturize and whatnot, and make sure everything is nice and good to go. But yeah, no, it's not. It's not rocket science or magic or anything like that. Y'all are gonna make me blush. Y'all are gonna. What color jeans? Sweatpants today. I'm giving the game away. Yeah, it's sweatpants today. I have to. Today's a work day, so I have to make sure that I am nice and comfortable and in an optimal situation to get my work and right. Not showing my sweatpants on IG Live. No, it's not like that. Oh man, y'all are wild. This is wonderful. This is wonderful. Shout out to the Afrolit Sans Frontières festival. Just to prove. Oh my goodness, y'all are wilding. Y'all are wilding. Oh man. Well, I hope everybody's doing well, especially those who have just joined. Um, so we can evaluate. Oh man. I think we are. No, I'm not ashamed at all of my sweatpants. Not at all.
Hi,
Hey, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you. I was like, why is he not accepting my request?
We made it work. We made it work. We made they want to see my sweatpants. Save me. They want to see my sweatpants. I know.
Well, you started it.
Zuki warned me that the crowd here was going to be a little wild and that I would have to deal with some interesting folks. But I don't know that I was prepared.
Okay, well, we can save the sweatpants for later.
Exactly. As a treat.
Okay, so do you want to read or do you just want us to jump straight into this?
Oh man, we can jump straight into this. So they can hear my voice, but also, if they want the book, it's available for purchase anywhere books are sold, ebook, hard copy, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay, you're basically saying if you want to read the book, buy it.
Yeah. Is that the most Niger thing ever? Or, you know?
No, I love it. It's fantastic. Let's go. So I always ask people at the beginning of all my kind of discussions, give me the elevator pitch for the book, which in this case is Riot Baby that I just finished like 2 nights ago. So go.
So, Riot Baby is the story of these two siblings, Ella and Kev, who grow up first in South Central LA. Their story takes them from there to Harlem, to Rikers, and then Watts. And all the while, they're having to deal with issues of structural racism, police brutality, mass incarceration, while developing superpowers.
Well, yeah, superpowers. Listen, when I
Yeah.
read this, I was like, I was expecting a lot of anger, and I got like this righteous anger. It was amazing. I stayed up all night and I was like, yes. Don't want to give too much away, but let's start at the beginning. When did you fall in love with sci-fi or spec fic?
Oh man, so definitely as a kid, but it was interesting. So I started reading fantasy and sci-fi probably around, I don't know, like middle school or so, middle school, maybe late grade school. But the my primary introduction to speculative fiction was through TV and through comics. And so,
Okay.
you know, I X-Men the animated series was like every Saturday morning I was up early to see that, and it made a very big impression on me. And you know, I also was part of the Toonami generation. So Cartoon Network had this block of programming from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. Uh, every Monday through Friday. And so, you know, it was the perfect after school block of programming. So you'd get home from school, I'd make sure to do my homework early, and then I would sit down, and it was all anime. And so it was, you know, it started out shows like Thundercats, Voltron, Sailor Moon, Ronin Warriors, and then it would start to bring in other shows like Dragon Ball Z, Gundam Wing, Outlaw Star. And so those were the biggest, you know, influences on me very early on with regards to speculative fiction. I also read a lot of manga. So I don't know, you can probably see in the back Akira by Katsuhiro Otomo, which is I got the big box set, you know, the I think it's the 25th anniversary edition because I love it so much. But it's this manga that is like extraordinary, and the anime adaptation is like groundbreaking and has been one of the biggest, I think, cultural markers with regards to the influence of anime in Western storytelling. And, you know, I read that when I was in high school, I think. And so it's like those are the primary influences for me. You know, a lot of writers, you know, they'll talk about, oh, I read Harry Potter at a young age, or like I read, you know, this, that, and the third. For me, it was so much of it was visual. And that's, I think, a big part of how I'm able to write the way that I write is I have to visualize it. I have to see it.
So, okay, this is kind of Akira. My younger brother introduced me to Akira and manga and anime, and I love it. But what was it? Do you think it was the idea of being able to take back your destiny? Because that's take control of your destiny. Because that's a theme in a lot of manga and anime. Do you think that's what it was that appealed to you?
Yeah, no, I find it's interesting in manga. There are so many different um, narrative impulses, right? Like in a lot of Western fantasy in particular, you get a lot of chosen one narratives, right? And a lot of that, the genealogy for that can, go all the way back to the New Testament, the Old Testament. This sort of, this one, and it's usually, it's some farm boy, from some distant province who's like destined to become the hero that ultimately saves the world from.
Wait, like Mighty Max.
Hmm?
I don't know if you know this. It's an old cartoon called Mighty Max, and he turns out to be this kid in a really small town, and it's like Mighty Max from Mars, and he's the chosen one, kind of
Hmm.
like that. Or
Exactly.
Superman.
Exactly. 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 So you'll see a lot of stuff like that. Whereas in manga, I was constantly encountering, and you see this a lot in anime too. There are these characters who are sort of downtrodden and they're ordinary, but it's not like a chosen one type thing in the same way. It's not like it's not an inheritance thing. Like it's not necessarily that their specialness is in their bloodline or anything like that. It's, they have to figure out for themselves the type of person that they want to become. Or, it'll be more complicated than that. A big influence for me was Gundam Wing growing up. And if you read War Girls, that's basically my love letter to Gundam Wing. And you have these 5 kids basically that are 15 years old and they're piloting these giant robots. And it's, it's not necessarily that they were chosen out of any particular aptitude. They were fashioned to become child soldiers. And like, I found that very, very, very interesting that these were just like ordinary kids that they made into these heroes, or in some cases, anti-heroes. And so I think that's a big thing that I come out of, or that I've been able to take out of the manga and anime tradition, is that you don't necessarily need to have this inherent or inherited specialness about you.
And that also is very political in many ways, that, you're not from the 1%, you're not going to inherit, you're not from privilege, which is powerful, because Riot Baby is really, really political.
Oh yeah.
And I love the idea of it being right now, but an alternate reality. And do you think being able to place it in an alternate reality was easier for you to deal with the political stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to make it very recognizable, right? And so, there's a portion of the book that takes place in the near future, but the vast majority of it is set in the here and now and in recent history. And it's been interesting talking to people after the book has come out, especially given how mixed the audience has been, right? Like, I knew this book was going to have a multiracial audience. And a lot of the conversation afterwards, the term dystopia kept coming up. And, people kept talking about the book and the world that Ella and Kev are living through as a dystopia. And it was surprising to me, because I was like, no, this is all stuff that happened and is happening.
Yeah, we're living in the dystopia.
Yeah, like Rodney King, like all of that happened. The killing of Sean Bell, that happened. Like, the use of algorithms to determine whether or not somebody gets released on parole or whether or not they can make bail. All of that's happening right now. And so I ended up asking the question, dystopian for whom? And I think that was a shock to a lot of readers, just this idea that, wait a second, there's this whole reality that Black people in America are living through that I had no idea about. That seems very science fictional. So I think that was an interesting sort of aspect of the conversation that I don't know that I was expecting.
Okay, so earlier I was accused of not acknowledging people in the comments. So I'm acknowledging them right now. I'm looking for questions, because, they'll just roast me for ages. Okay. Oh God, what is happening here? You guys, where are the questions?
They're all like, show me your sweatpants.
You know what, Tochi, if we're going to continue, you should just show them the sweatpants.
I should show them the sweatpants? Oh my goodness. I can't believe this is happening. And then
there you go. You've seen the sweatpants. Thank you, Tochi. You can sit down. Wow. Okay. So some of your work is for, you see, now I want questions. Oh God, where is this?
You know what it's the lockdown. People are on lockdown, and the thirst is. I can relate.
Real. Oh my God, Frankie says, "What a package." Let's go back to the literature. Let's go back to the literature. Okay, so you've written for young adults, and I wanted to know, what do you think is the difference between writing for young adults as opposed to writing for adults?
So it's interesting. When I first started writing for young adults, there was the idea, and this was a notion that I had to sort of disabuse myself of. There was the idea that I would be writing down to them, right? Because everything that I'd written before was adult. But I found very early on that I was actually writing up to my audience. Like, the teenagers, the young adults that I was writing for were incredibly sophisticated readers, and they got it. Like whenever I would put in subtle things or allusions to certain themes and whatnot, like they really, really, really got it, and they understood what I was trying to do and what I was trying to talk about. For me, in terms of technique, the difference to me is that writing for young adult is like playing basketball, and writing for adults is like competing in the X Games. So writing for young adults, the goal is to score as many points as possible, right? And there are only so many different ways you can get the ball in the basket. You can drive to the rim and dunk, or you can lay up, shoot from the free throw line. You got the pull up jumper, et cetera, et cetera. But the goal is the same. And so to me, that's sort of like hitting your marks. And so as a young adult writer, there are certain marks that I have to hit with regards to plot development, character arcs, world building, things of that sort. And with adult, for me, in the X Games, it's sort of like, especially if you look at like the half pipe competitions, the idea is to do the most stylistically daring trick possible. Like, you got to go upside down and spin around 3 times. Like that, like, it's like that kind of thing, right? And that, for me, is sort of like the biggest difference. And it's not to say that one is more difficult than the other. I think, writing for young adults tests different muscles for me than writing for adult. But at the same time, writing for adult, I can do things, or I feel like I have permission to do things that I wouldn't necessarily be able to pull off, for a young adult audience.
So let's go back to Ride Baby, because I have a lot to say about Ride Baby. And listen, and I was reading this at night as well, and suddenly I was just terrified for my safety. There's this real anxiety and angst in this book. I felt like Kev couldn't get a break. And I just want to know why you were so cruel to Kev. I feel like he could not get a break.
Yeah, it hurt to like write what he's going through. I mean, the thing about it is that all of that is real. All of that, the conditions in Rikers, I didn't have to stretch my imagination for that. A lot of the stories that you encounter with regards to other prisoners in Rikers, there's one sequence where Kev is talking to a younger prisoner who's in solitary and who's on suicide watch, and he's telling him about all the other prisoners that he's encountered during his time there. And he talks about, for instance, a book club that he was a part of, or another prisoner who like used to garden. And then there are other parts of Rikers or the Rikers portion of the book where, people have been there for years and years and years and years and years and not even been to trial for sentencing. So like all that stuff, it like actually happens. And one thing that I wanted to show was that there's so much humanity that can happen in these places, right? Because I think, at least particularly in American media, there's almost this uniform vision of jail and prison as a place where like people become animals, right? Like it's only the worst of the worst who get there. It's always violent. They're like people give in to their basest instincts and their worst impulses. But the fact of the matter is that they're all human beings in there. Like people don't stop being people in behind bars. They don't stop being capable of love and friendship and brotherhood and, consoling each other and all these sort of manifestations of humanity. Like they don't stop being capable of those things. All that persists, the business of being human persists in jail and prison. And I think that is part of why the portions with regards to Kev are as difficult to read as they are, because it's not that, oh, it's just like gore and it's not just that it's a horror movie, right? It's like this is happening to somebody who's trying, right? Who's trying to survive and to keep being human. And I think that's the biggest tragedy of incarceration, and that I wanted to sort of put out there for an audience to see, is that like these are human beings. These are human beings. But also too, like the very fact that Kev ends up in a place like that, there is this sense of inevitability about it. And you go through a lot of communities, and it's almost as though being incarcerated is a rite of passage. Not because you did anything or like you're expected to do anything. You're not expected to be involved in gang shit or whatever. It's just like, that's just how things go. This is just how the police treat you. This is just like the place that we live in, is you wind up there and then you come back out, et cetera, et cetera. And that was another thing that I wanted to portray too, which is that, you know, it's the sheer sort of unfairness of it. It's almost like, it's almost cosmic. There's like an element of Greek prophecy in it, right? Like this is just predetermined for you. This is your fate. And that's the reality for a lot of people, for a lot of Black Americans.
Well, you know what was interesting to me was the anger, right? Because I wasn't uncomfortable with the anger. It was justified, but I kept thinking about in an age of when they go low, we go high, or whatever, be the bigger person, whatever. And I was wondering, what were people's reactions? What were the different reactions to the kind of rage? Because I was very, very satisfied with the anger. It was the correct amount of anger. It was justified, especially since you know you meet these characters when they're kids. And I wanted to know, what are people's reactions to the real dense kind of real anger in the book from the characters?
Definitely. I think a lot of people like you believe it's justified or see it as justified. I think the readers who are frightened by it have been too scared to tell me that they're frightened by it. Or they've been hesitant to be like, I don't know if I agree. Like, so I haven't gotten a whole lot of those reactions, but I don't think it's because those reactions don't exist, right? And like that's been a very interesting part to me, because, you know, similar to how a lot of readers will look at the ending as like a hopeful ending, which is always very interesting to hear. A lot of people talk about how justified the anger is in the book, but not necessarily parsing like why that anger is in the book. And, you know, oftentimes when I say people, I'm referring to, you know, white readers and white reviewers who'll be like, oh, this anger is so justified. And then it's like, do you guys realize that you're part of the problem?
It's like, oh yeah, no, that book is hectic, but you know, whatever.
Yeah, no, exactly. So like it's almost like in Get Out, right? Like that Jordan Peele movie where, you know, afterwards people would try to justify Allison Williams' character and be like, oh, like it's not her fault or whatever. No, she's like a bad person. She's a villain in that movie, and people were trying to take her side because they refused to see themselves in her when that character was very much a reflection of them. And it's interesting seeing a similar sort of deflection go on with Riot Baby. But also too, I think a big thing about Riot Baby is that it's not necessarily castigating and villainizing individual people so much as systems, right? It's the system of how we utilize police in America, the system of mass incarceration, the system of our courts, the system of parole and probation, and the whole sort of post-incarceration, basically continuance of incarceration. You know, it's these systems that need to be broken down, and ultimately it's like, you know, the systems that and also too, like on a medical basis too, like there's one thing that I wanted to make sure that I talked about in the book was the horrible care that Black women get, in particular, with regards to medical care, and the absurdly high maternal mortality rate. And you look at the difference in that, for them versus for their white counterparts, and it's the type of thing where your class can't save you, right? Like being wealthy can't save you from that. Serena Williams almost died
Happened to
giving
Serena
birth.
too, right? Yeah.
Yeah, like Beyonce had trouble giving birth, and it's like these are like two of the most powerful, not just Black women, but women culturally in America. And if they're not getting like if they're not being treated as empresses when they're giving
Yeah.
birth, like what is going on? And so it's these systems that I wanted to sort of get at, and I think that's another way for people to feel as though the anger is justified, because it's like, oh, these people aren't angry at me, or these characters aren't angry at me. They're angry at the system. But at the same time, people may not necessarily be making the connection between them and their participation in the system.
But also systems are made up of people. And I don't know who
Exactly.
these magical people that nobody knows make up the system. But
Exactly.
this was a very difficult book to read as well because, like I said, we know Kev even before he's born, and it's difficult to see him go through this. And I wanted to know which parts of the book were difficult for you to read or to write or edit.
Oh man. So a lot of the Riker's parts, um, but I think what was difficult, or it's interesting because a lot of the book felt easy to write, in that it came out of me very quickly, right? It came out of me very easily, and I think that's a testament to how much this book or this story needed to get out of me. It wasn't necessarily like I was pulling teeth, writing this story. At the same time, it felt immensely cathartic and at the same time emotionally draining. And I think a big part of why it was emotionally draining was, you know, the fact that there were so many real life analogs to almost every single event or what the characters were going through. Um, I think as far as difficult to write, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, it's always tough watching Kev suffer because I loved him so much, and I was like, I just want you to win. Like, I just want you to win.
We
Um,
all wanted Kev to win. You had the power to do something good for him. Okay, wait, hold on. So Maza asked a question, and wait, now where is the question? She says, what might a post-COVID dystopian world look like for writers trying to imagine it?
whew, oh my goodness. It's I guess I'm just going to sort of give into the pessimism for a little bit. I think the post-COVID world, at least, and I can't necessarily speak to, the UK or Europe or in Africa, but at least in America, I think we're going to see a similar thing to what we saw after 9/11, which is an increased surveillance state. We're going to see more and more government sort of intervention tracking your movements, tracking your internet browser history, or tracking your phone or what have you. And it's all going to be, under the impetus of public health, right? So, oh, we're trying to make the community safer by looking up your Google searches, or like following, activating the GPS on your phone, or making sure that you have certain apps downloaded. So I think that's going to be a big, and there are already places that are talking about it. There are already local governments that are, starting to put together proposals for, techniques with certain tech companies to devise certain solutions to this sort of thing. Because while it's very urgent to be able to, contain something like COVID-19, we have to really think about how we're doing that, right? So I think there's that. I think also there's a fascinating thing happening now where there's been so much there's been so much emphasis put on how essential certain workers are, right? And all of a sudden, everybody cares, or at least pretends to care about grocery workers and postal workers and delivery people and nurses and doctors, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it's like, in the same way that, in America at least, you'll get a lot of people who look at soldiers and are like, thank you for your service. And, they try to be all patriotic, but they're not going to lobby their, senators or representatives to like, increase benefits for veterans. It's that sort of thing. It's very sort of empty. And you see the same thing now happening with a lot of essential workers. And so I feel like even though there's greater awareness for the role of these workers and the sort of horrible conditions that they're being forced to work under, I feel like there's going to be a very quick return to normal, or at least what normal used to be. Americans have notoriously short memories, notoriously short. And so I feel like as soon as the worst of this passes, we're going to go back to, not paying attention to these people. But I do believe that there will be a new strain of activism, or that there will be, increased activism where there is already, with regards to labor in that movement. And so where sort of writers and imagination comes into that, I think it's interesting because moments like this allow us to expand our moral imagination, right? I think, in envisioning, particularly with science fiction, utopian and dystopian societies, right? There's so much, I think, imaginative power geared towards, ostensible ways in which oppression will manifest itself, or sort of surface level ways in which oppression manifests itself. But, looking at what is going on now, and, very interestingly seeing how the narrative changed once people realized in America that, that communities of color were being disproportionately hit by COVID-19 than white communities, seeing like how explicitly that narrative shifted, I think made a lot of people realize that there are vectors of oppression, not just with regards to governmental policy, but even with regards to the media. And it's not as though like it's a government controlled media. Like it's not like a 1984 type situation. It's, sort of capitalist, impulses that are driving this sort of thing. So I think, I wonder too if writers that are thinking with the pandemic in the back of their minds when they're writing their stories will also be considering that.
But also, I think it's just difficult. So I found a question here and now it's gone. Jesus. I was going to say it's difficult to write about a dystopia when we're living it. Somebody asked, given the influence pandemics and major world events have on literature, what do you think African literature's place will be post-pandemic?
Oh, that's a good question. I think one of the interesting things is the ways in which the pandemic has disrupted publishing, at least in American publishing. And so, you see it with regards to supply chains and how it's increasingly difficult to get paper from China. But also, too, there's this idea in American publishing that you have to live in New York in order to work in publishing and to be a part of the publishing machine. If you want to be an editor, if you want to be an agent, if you want to be in that world at all, you had to live in New York. And it's prohibitively expensive to live in New York. It's such a big barrier to entry. And now a lot of places are being forced to allow their employees to work remotely. And what this is sort of doing is it's democratizing the workforce in many ways. And so if this trend continues, you may potentially see a diversification of the workforce such that people for whom a career in publishing would have been closed off to them before because they couldn't necessarily move to New York, or they couldn't live in New York, or they didn't have access to those communities, may find themselves now able to apply for those jobs or apply for, what have you, and bring their own different perspectives to the table. And I think my hope is that with that, we start to see one byproduct could potentially be a greater infiltration of African literature and African influenced literature in the US. Now, I don't know what the situation is with regards to the impact of COVID-19 on publishing on the continent, right? Like, because I feel like, African publishing houses and African distributors are facing a different reality from a lot of the big five houses in New York or in the US. And so I think it'll be I mean, writers are going to write, that's not going to stop us. Like, as long as we have, electricity in the computer, or as long as we have pen and paper, like, we're going to write, we're going to tell stories. It's just a matter of when and how we get those stories out there. I think one of the things that I do hope is that we see a sort of diminishment in the prominence of New York, London, and Paris as the epicenters of global publishing in the Western world. Like, I hope we see a greater democratization of that. I hope we start to see, more and more places on the continent able to build up their own infrastructure and build up their own sort of prominence, and not necessarily have to be as dependent on, Europe and the US to bring that literature to light. And so I don't know if that's a satisfactory answer, but it's sort of, yeah.
So, okay, the people have spoken and they really want you to read from Riot Baby.
Okay.
Reading. Can you read from Riot Baby? Okay, you need to read.
Okay. The
The
people have spoken. Okay. So I'm going to read, hold on. I'm going to read a scene from the Riker section, which is, I guess the background for this is that Kev has been locked up in Rikers, and Ella's powers have developed to the point where she doesn't feel safe at home, or doesn't feel safe around her family at home, and so has gone into a sort of self-imposed exile. And this is the first time that she's visiting Kev in prison in person. You ain't gonna ask who did this? Kev doesn't need to point to the laceration at his temple, the bandage that struggles to cover the length of slice and can't. Ella leans back in her chair across the table from Kev, while loved ones or family or friends or old classmates or people settling a grudge or people burying a hatchet do this visit thing. She has her arms crossed, postural defiant. Anger, unfamiliar and slow, swirls at the bottom of her gut, creeps into the back of her brain. Nope, she says. Kev leans forward and already has that conspiratorial convict hunch that cons have on TV or in movies. You gonna read my mind or something? Scan one of the CO's brains or something? I bet you could just put your hand to the floor and get all the stories that ever passed through this place. He's not wrong. Ella's mind had wandered into one of the female COs who stood by a wall with her baton cradled under her crossed arms. There's one inmate, a black guy with tight cornrows, meeting with another dude, probably a brother or cousin who rep the same set, that she has made it her duty not to look at. And Ella knows, can probably tell without diving, that they're fucking. Memories run like shards across her line of sight, the two of them on the outside, he with his crew when he was younger, and she with her older cousin, both her and her cousin sporting big hoop earrings with their names in gold, walking back from the movies and passing the boy with his crew and the boy hollering at her, and the big cousin telling the boy off in sharp, smooth, knife blade Spanish. Then furtive sneaking from one's house to the other's to fuck after the girl had gotten out of school. And the boy not doing well in class and his mother not around because she was working 3 jobs, and he couldn't bear to see an eviction notice slide under their door like it did to the people 1 floor up. So he starts slanging, and when he hollers at the girl with his new kicks and his chain, that will be snatched in a week or so and that he'll have to stomp someone out to get back, she smirks. And the cousin fights even harder to keep the girl away from that sweat-sheened, Carhartt-clothed, muscled, bejeweled embodiment of trouble. More fucking. Then the girl goes to college, and the guy goes to jail for dope and a parole violation from a prior, and there's a guard shift, and as he's lined up with the other inmates on his block, he looks out the corner of his eye and sees homegirl walking down the line, tapping her baton against thighs he remembers she used to wrap around his back when they got the springs in her bed frame to squeak and groan. It wasn't her, Kev says, and Ella realizes she's been staring. I know. But Ella can barely concentrate because an inmate 3 tables ahead has a shank wrapped up and shoved into his rectum, and Ella feels herself boofing. And in that inmate's mind's eye, and now Ella's eye, is an image, a flash, of tissue he stuck in the door's locking mechanism so that he could jiggle it open, even though it showed up as closed on the guard's boards. Then a jagged, slow-motion clip of the inmate's plan to pop his cell after lights out and join 2 others who'd done the same to knife an Aryan whose son on the outside put that guy's son in the hospital at a Confederate flag rally. But that's the thing about the hospital, you know? You get your little bit of freedom. That's how you get it. That's how you get the attention you've been dying to get. Gets to be a bit like home after a while. I ain't been around much. Ella dislikes that it feels like an apology. She hasn't gotten to hate yet. But you know how the fam is. When Kev finally looks up from his folded hands, there's fear in his eyes. For the first time since Ella started visiting. In his brain are capsules, pills, Seroquel, Benadryl, drugs the medical staff give him, sometimes saved up so that he can just lie there and take a bunch at once and just wait for them to hit, only to wake up the next day and realize, fuck, I can't do this. It's all in Kev's eyes, and Ella sees it, though her ephemeral fingers only touch the contours of that thought. And Kev, asking her without opening his mouth, you could burn it down. You could just burn this motherfucker down, all of it. Please, just burn it down. She looks down, then up again and past her brother. There's an inmate talking to his baby's mother, and the inmate's leg is bobbing up and down because earlier in the day he splashed a CO, threw urine all over the guy's face and soaked the front of his uniform, practically popped a balloon on him, then put his arms behind his head so that the cameras would see that he wasn't resisting or striking the CO. He knew that guy and a bunch of his buddies would be waiting for him, maybe right outside the showers in the camera's blind spot, to put him in the hospital or maybe even kill him, and this might be the last time he sees his baby's face ever again. The metal table dips where Ella's fingers press into it, and she realizes what she's doing and takes her hand off and puts it in her lap. An older man tells his grandson, brought in by his daughter, about how he's learning chess so that when he gets out he can play his grandson, who's getting really good apparently. He says this, knowing he will not get out, that he will die either here or somewhere upstate where, he hears, the prisons are starting to turn more into hospices than anything else. But he still tells his grandson about how he's learning to play in solitary because that makes his situation seem less scary, though his daughter knows exactly what a stay in the Bing entails. And the older man's words are brightly colored, even as Ella sees the man's imagination, sees the man and the inmate in the cell next door both drawing the board on pieces of paper and screaming their moves out to each other, and the loneliness washes purple over the image and reminds the older man about how dirty his cell was when he first moved in, and how the only way to get sanitation to come in and clean it was to stuff the toilet with books he was sent and flood the cell, or to break the toilet so that the cell became unusable. Ella wants to tell Kev to just survive, as though that would be enough. Just survive. But in her chest, it becomes a cruel thing to ask him to do. She doesn't want to reduce this entire compound. It's 10 jail facilities with approximately 60 beds in each. It's 8 by 10 solitary confinement chambers. It's hallways and the cameras placed so that there were blind spots where the bleeding happened. And it's railings and it's bars and it's slatted windows and it's shitty air conditioning, all to dust. She wants to be able to go port back in time, reach her hand in and put it to Kev's chest the night of that attempted armed robbery. Or to go back even further and stay closer to Kev for longer, to keep him in that bubble of protection so that cops would leave him alone more often. Or to go back even further and keep him from becoming friends with Freddie, who would one day get picked up by cops for looking at one for too long, and in the police van, on the way to the station, would get his spine severed. Because maybe, if Kev didn't know him as a friend, as a brother almost, in Ella's absence, while Ella went to discover her powers where she couldn't hurt people, maybe Kev might not be here. Or maybe reach back even further and nudge Mama to bring the family somewhere else where the land didn't burn underneath them and catch fire, where they could settle and where white people were maybe a little less thirsty for his blood. I'd stop time for you, Kev, she almost says. The fear dampens in Kev's eyes, and Ella realizes Kev heard her anyway. Brother and sister smile across the table at each other. Later, as Ella gets up to leave and walks back to the gate, she brushes past a young woman, and pain spikes through her spine, and she sees it. Sees the Latino with the dark wavy hair and the little Dominican boy at her knee, and sees them at home, and sees the Latino woman in the kitchen on the phone screaming upon hearing that her child's father has died, and sees the Latino woman and the dead man's mother and their lawyer poring over the autopsy reports, saying he'd had ulcers, and reports and memos that indicated that when they'd ruptured, the other prisoners had called for help while the guard on duty sipped coffee at his desk down the hall and watched. Ella sees the woman and her son return to the jail to pick up the dissident's things. A red champ hoodie, his wallet, and a gray, red, and black Bulls hat. The woman outside hugging herself against the cold and giving the sweater to her son, who is shivering.
Thank you. So Maza asked a question while you were reading. Earlier, I spoke to Dil Mandela, and we were talking about, he was saying the supernatural is funny, and somebody asked him what scares him. And he was talking about preachers, religious leaders having all of this power. That's what's really scary for him. Them having all of this power and being able to kind of be on the side of political power. And Maza wants to know if you consider, religious, religion or religious leaders in your work when you're writing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Faith and religion are things that I think about a lot when I both read and write. And it's funny, I'm reading Pachinko now by Min-Jin Lee, and it's a very interesting, in many ways, mediation on the issue of faith and suffering. And I find it very fascinating. Yeah, no, I think a lot about religion and its multifacetedness, right? Like there's a conversation that Ella has with a pastor in Riot Baby about anger and behavior and like docility and God. And it's one of those conversations that I've heard so often, where you'll see religious leaders who are like, okay, behave a certain way, or don't let them see your anger, and it's almost sort of out of a desire to protect you, but at the same time it's this sort of caging of self that they're trying to impose. And there's the way in which religion is braided into the history of this country, the way in which it's been warped. The Christianity was used to justify slavery, right? Chattel slavery. At the same time, Christianity is what allowed my mother, who's a widow, to persist and to continue in life and to raise 4 kids by herself, right? Christianity has been used to justify all types of horrors, and it has been used to empower some of the worst people, and it has been offered as justification for some of the worst impulses in people. At the same time, it has provided untold solace to people who are suffering. Right, like you look at the role of like Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He was a reverend. Like, he came from a religious background. He was a religious leader. So much of the cadence of how he spoke to people, that was developed in the church. You look at a lot of the writing of James Baldwin, and religion and the church feature very heavily in his writing, and so it's like there's such a power there. And I feel like the idea of fear or skepticism towards religious leaders is sort of a skepticism that we should have towards leaders in general, whether it's political leaders, whether it's religious leaders, whether it's famous athletes or movie stars or what have you. I think it's one of those things where religion is such a powerful uniter of people, and it's a way that groups are brought together, but it's also a way in which they can be made into an army. And I think that's something that we have to be careful of and skeptical of. In the same way that, you know, communism can make people into an army, Christianity, any of the Abrahamic religions can be used to make people into an army and make them do horrible things. But it can also provide people with a sense of purpose and direction and can alleviate a sort of crippling sense of loneliness that can afflict them, particularly in this postmodern age.
Well, I'm telling you, you're getting a lot of yes, yes, you're right. Amen. Preach over there. So before Zuki tells me that we're out of time, I just want to thank you. This has been so much fun. And thank you for writing Riot Baby. It kept me up for a long time. I will think about Kevin Ella for a while. And I think you're amazing. And just one thing, we didn't get to discuss futures, but it's just something that I think we should think about as writers. There's a lot of dystopia where we're living right now. So maybe we should think about what kind of futures we're imagining in our work.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for having me. And thank you for your kind words on Riot Baby. This has been so wonderful.
Thank you. And have a great evening. I'm drinking water, but I'm going to go have very late supper. Thank you so
wonderful.
much, Tochi.
Thank you. Take care. And bye, everyone. Oh, of course.
Bye.
And bye, everyone. Thank you for coming.